Hey friends, happy Thursday. Welcome back to another Cook with Kris. Today we are making spring risotto. I have a ton of delicious fresh spring ingredients in front of me, and I'm going to teach you how to make a classic risotto. So I love to start these off just by sharing with you the ingredients I've got in front of me. Today we're not going to mise en place together. I am really just going to focus on the actual process of making risotto. We're going to make an authentic risotto with our arborio rice, which I actually need to open. I was very surprised that Trader Joe's did not have arborio rice, which I thought they did, but this is the rice you want to use. You can use short grain rice as well, but like this is your classic rice that you would use for an Italian style risotto. So we have our arborio rice, and I'm going to share with you the method for making risotto. Risotto is not exactly the super quick weeknight dinner that you might desire. It does take a little bit longer to prepare, a little bit more care. However, with a little bit of love and about 30 minutes, it comes together and makes a really beautiful dish, especially when you use seasonal ingredients. And that is what we are going to do today. We're going to use some really delicious spring ingredients. So let me go ahead, share with you everything that I have in front of me, ready to go, and we will go ahead and start cooking our risotto. So first thing you're going to need is some sort of a fat to cook in. So I like using half olive oil, half butter. All this does, and this is just like the Trader Joe's grass-fed butter. I use salted, you can use either one. But the reason behind half butter, half oil is it increases the smoke point of the butter, so there's less likelihood that your butter is going to burn, but you still get that buttery flavor. So I'm actually going to start by sauteing my veggies, or at least my mushrooms, in the olive oil and butter, and then I'm going to add a little bit more for the risotto because we need that butter in our risotto. So my vegetables, we're going to start by sauteing some mushrooms. I have about a pound, and these are just organic white mushrooms. I usually use Baby Bella. They didn't have any at Trader Joe's. Use what you've got. If you've got wild mushrooms, even better. So I'm going to start by sauteing those up. Take them out of the pan, set them aside. I have one very small onion, but typically about a half an onion or a full shallot if you have a shallot. 2 big old cloves of garlic. You guys know I love my garlic. I shared with you that I have my arborio rice. I'm using some chicken stock, which is warming behind me on the stove. You want your chicken stock nice and simmering before you put it in your risotto. I have some spring peas. These are fresh peas, but you could absolutely use frozen. And then I have about a cup of fresh asparagus. I was actually just teaching my mom a really easy asparagus trick, so I'm going to share that with you guys right now because these are just chopped on a diagonal, about kind of like inch-long pieces. But when it is early spring and you're picking out your asparagus, we know that thinner is better when it comes to asparagus because it tends to have, it tends to be a little bit more tender. Some of the asparagus tend to be a little bit kind of thicker in the early and the late, kind of into the summertime or the early spring. But how to know if your asparagus is going to be tender or just use the tender part of the asparagus is by just going close to the end and snapping it. It will snap off at the tender part. I know this seems like a lot of waste. You can save this. Actually, that part would have worked too. You can save this for asparagus soup if you want to, but you'll notice that this part of the asparagus is not going to snap easily. You would have to really, really snap it. And if it doesn't snap easily, that is the part that's like really chewy and kind of stringy. So if you want that really super tender asparagus, go down close to the end, and where it naturally snaps, that is where you're going to find the most tender asparagus. So I just thought I would share that with you guys. The only other things you are going to need, you're going to need some sort of, I mentioned the chicken stock. You're also going to need some dry wine to just deglaze your pan. It's one of the primary ingredients along with the chicken stock in cooking the rice. Now, I mean, this is not anything fancy. This is like a $9 bottle of wine, but it's not terrible tasting. So you want something dry and something that you would drink. It might not be like what you would serve at a dinner party, but it's not something terrible because you are going to taste the flavors of it. And you don't want it too sweet because then your risotto will be extra sweet. I'm using the zest of about half of a lemon. So I'm also using that for a spring style risotto. We're going to salt at the end, not when we're cooking. And your broth might also have some salt in it as well if you're not using homemade. So make sure you're salting at the end. And then also some Parmesan cheese, which I'm going to grate in. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Let's jump in. Like I said, I'm going to start by cooking the mushrooms, and then once the mushrooms are all nice and sauteed, we're gonna go ahead and share the process of cooking risotto. Risotto is one of those foods that can seem really intimidating because it does take a little bit more time and care. But we're not talking hours, okay? We're talking, it's gonna take like a half an hour, and you need to pay a little bit more attention to it than you might something else that you just set it and forget it. But it's a classic dish. It's great for a dinner party, especially in the springtime. It's great with whatever protein you want on top, really. So I'm doing about a tablespoon each of olive oil and a tablespoon of that butter. And I'm just gonna swirl it around in the bottom. And I'm just gonna use a wooden spoon or a spatula for this whole deal. Now I will salt the mushrooms when I put them in. Just because they are being cooked by themselves. I am using a Dutch oven here. If you had a slightly larger and slightly lower pot, like a saucier, that would also be perfect. But this is what I got, and this is what we're using today. These, like you've heard me talk about before, are not going to be like your perfectly crispy mushrooms. They're just going to be kind of sauteed, cooked up. But the point is that they're nice and cooked, so we're going to throw them in at the end. The other vegetables are going to cook in the risotto towards the end of cooking, but I want to make sure that these are nice and sauteed. They'll be lightly browned before we get the rest of the risotto going. So while these are starting to cook in here, by the way, I have the pan turned up to about medium. I'm just going to cook it up, or turn it up a little bit more. And I am actually going to angle the camera down just a little bit so you guys can see what I'm doing. So while this is sauteing, let's see if I can angle this a little bit. You won't be able to see me as well, but that's not what you're here for. All right. Let's see if we can. All right. I think that's the best we can do. That's okay. So we're just gonna go ahead and continue to saute this up. You'll notice that there is some liquid releasing from the mushrooms. And like I said, if you want super crispy mushrooms, you wanna use a wider pan, and then they will saute more than they will steam. When you're cooking them like this, they're steaming a little bit because they are gonna be releasing liquid. So, but for me, in this instance, it doesn't matter to me that much. You can cook them a little bit longer. Once that liquid is evaporated, you can actually probably see that some of that liquid is forming in the bottom there, and that's totally okay. Once the liquid's evaporated, they will start to brown a little bit, but really the purpose is just seasoning and cooking the mushrooms right now. And by the way, if any of these ingredients don't appeal to you, that's cool. You can use a different ingredient instead. If it is a heartier ingredient, you might want to cook it ahead of time. Things like asparagus and green peas, we want them to still have that really you want them to have some bite to it, right? You don't want them to be mushy in the risotto at the end, so they don't need very long to cook. And the mushrooms don't need very long to cook either, but you can see how much liquid that they release. You don't want that in your risotto, so you want to cook those ahead of time so that they're already nice and cooked. And we're just going to cook those down, and we will go ahead and get everything else on in there once they're done. So let's talk about, while the mushrooms are cooking, about the process of cooking risotto. So we are going to use about 1 cup of dry risotto, which I'll just go ahead and measure out right now. And the process for cooking risotto is very different than if you were to cook rice in, say, a rice cooker and just set it and forget it, right? So with risotto, you are very slowly rehydrating the rice with a warm liquid. So I'm going to saute the onions. Once these mushrooms are done, I'm going to saute the onions and the garlic, and as soon as they are nice and sauteed, I'm going to add the rice, and I'm going to coat that rice with oil. That's going to start to season it with the oil and butter mixture, like I mentioned. We're going to coat it, and then we are going to add about 1/3 of a cup of white wine. As soon as that liquid is absorbed, so the wine is mostly absorbed, yes, the alcohol cooks out of it, there's no worries, serving this to kiddos, it's just adding flavor. As soon as that is absorbed, we're gonna go ahead, and like I said, I still have to, I'm gonna turn this back on to warm. We are going to add that warm broth ladle by ladle, okay? I just have my soup ladle over here. We're gonna add the warm broth ladle by ladle to our rice, and the rice is going to slowly start to absorb that liquid. So our mushrooms are almost done here. We're just letting them release a little bit more liquid. We're gonna set them aside and we will start going with that process. So wine until it's almost dry, and then adding the broth slowly to the rice, one ladle at a time. When it's absorbed, and you're gonna just stand and you're gonna stir, and you can put some music on. If it's dinner time, you can have a glass of wine. Take the time to enjoy the process of making risotto. It really is like a meditative experience. I love making risotto. There's a lot of recipes out there that will tell you like the quick method for cooking risotto, but you guys, there's nothing like the original. And we're just happening to use spring flavors today. And my glasses will probably fog up in this process because I'm very close to the pot today. Okay. So I'm gonna show you I'm gonna move the camera really quick. You guys should probably be able to see at this point, the mushrooms are pretty well cooked. Okay. Hopefully that won't fall. And I'm just gonna take them out of the pan. Let me adjust you guys again. This is, okay. I think we're good. Okay. I'm trying out new camera angles, you guys. It's just me. It's just me filming on my own. Maybe one day I'll get a videographer. We can make these professional. Or I'll get a fancier tripod. All right, so we're removing these mushrooms. They're just nice and sauteed. And that was just the same bowl I put the mushrooms in before. They were washed, so you don't need to worry about it not washed. By the way, okay, this is an aside. This is a mushroom aside. Please don't wash your mushrooms. They'll get mushy. Okay, so how you clean mushrooms, if you guys did not know this, is you take a moist paper towel. I know people don't like that word, but like if you don't want a wet paper towel, you don't want a dry paper towel, you want a moist paper towel. So it is what it is, guys. You want a moist paper towel and you clean off any of the dirt on there. You do not want to wash them. They will turn mushy, and that's not the vibe we're going for. All right, so our pan is still fairly hot right now. Okay, we're at about medium to medium high. I'm going to add 1 more tablespoon of butter and olive oil. And if you're just hopping on, we're using a mix of butter and olive oil. You can always leave the, by the way, you can make this a fully plant-based dish if you use plant butter, or if you want to just use oil. And then obviously you wouldn't use chicken broth, you would use veggie broth. So we're using half oil, half butter to increase the smoke point of the butter, but still have that buttery flavor. So adding about a tablespoon of each back. I'm going to add about half of a regular size onion, or 1 very small onion, or a full shallot. One or the other. And we're adding that to the bottom, and we are just quickly sauteing that. We're coating it in the butter just until translucent, or until it's starting to turn translucent. We're gonna stir in the garlic, and then we're going to immediately stir in 1 cup of risotto. I'm hoping this isn't too loud because the food is a little bit closer to the pot than usual. Okay, that's it, you guys. Just starting to turn translucent really fast. This part does not take long at all. I'm gonna add those 2 big cloves of garlic. Again, measure garlic with your heart. If you want more, go for it. All right, this is gonna be about it. Yep. Garlic is done. You do not want your garlic. Adding in the rice, coating it with the oil. You do not want your garlic to brown. Brown garlic is bitter garlic. Okay, so see how I am you should be able to see this fairly well. I am just coating the rice with oil. We're still at about a medium heat right here, coating it with oil. And then I'm gonna grab my wine, my dry white wine. And if you don't wanna use wine, if you don't use wine at all, you can use the same amount of water, so about 1/3 of a cup of water with a tablespoon of lemon juice. It'll add a little bit of that acidity as well. And we've got our hot broth. So I'm gonna do 1/3 of a cup of wine, and we are just gonna stir that in until it's almost dry. So until the wine basically disappears. All right, 1/3 of a cup. I'm gonna add that in. If your pan is hot, this is gonna happen pretty quickly, and just stir. You're gonna see that start to evaporate. And I will try to show you guys once I stir it in. You wanna make sure most of those pieces of your little arborio, that short grain rice, they're off the sides. Okay, let me try and show you guys this. Okay, so do you see how that is absorbed? Okay, now it's time to add the broth. We gotta go ahead and add that broth now. So we're gonna do that. So I've got my hot broth. Yeah, that's not safe. We're not gonna do that. We're gonna stay safe. I'm gonna get my broth off the stove. And we're gonna add one ladle full at a time and stir, okay? So one ladle. And so if I were at the stove, then I would be two burners, one next to another. And you just want to make sure you're keeping that broth fairly warm. But this will start to come together fairly quickly once it gets going. You're just going to be adding broth and you're going to be stirring until it's almost dry. So just like, until it's absorbed, okay? Just like with that wine. And an average ladle is typically about, your average size ladle is typically about 1/3 of a cup as well. So you're adding about 1/3 to 1/2 of a cup at a time until it's all soaked in. So again, same deal. It's pretty much all soaked in. So now we're gonna go ahead, and I think I'm sideways now, but you know, we're going with it. Okay, more broth. Okay. Stir, stir, stir. You just don't want it to stick. You don't want it up too high. So I'm gonna turn it down a little bit low because it's pretty high. You don't want it too high, primarily because you don't want the liquid evaporating before it really has time to soak into the rice. Because the goal is that you are cooking the rice here. You don't just want the liquid to disappear, you want to actually cook the rice. So that is our goal. So you're gonna notice it starts to get creamy and you're like, oh, delicious, it looks like risotto. And then the liquid's gonna disappear and you're gonna be like, oh no, I need more. So you're going to be cooking this until the rice is soft. It has a little bit of a bite to it. So think al dente pasta, okay? You want it to have a little bit of a bite to it, but very, very little, okay? You don't want the grains to have any white in the middle. You want it to be cooked, and once the liquid stops absorbing into the rice, when it's creamy, but the rice is cooked, that's when you know you're done. Okay, so stir, stir, time for another ladle. So I forgot to mention that I'm starting with about 3 cups of hot stock. I'm using 1 cup of dry risotto rice. That's the arborio rice for those of you who are just hopping on. You can use any sort of short grain rice you want, but arborio is what is traditional and what is going to work best with this method. So you can try with something else, but we lost connection again for a second. I even put the settings differently this time, you guys. That's okay, we're just stirring. You'll notice that as the rice starts to cook, each addition, especially because I turned it down a little bit, might take a little bit longer to start to soak in. That's okay, the rice is cooking as you go. So this isn't something, like I mentioned, that you want to leave. This is your date night, dinner party, you know, if you don't mind the kids running around you, as long as, they know that you can't leave the rice. But it's a really delicious dish, very family friendly. And it's just a classic that you need to have in your repertoire, okay? You need to know how to make a classic risotto. So good. Oh, I remember eating like my first real risotto in Italy. I have so many amazing memories of my time in Italy. And my sister is planning on going to Italy. She's been as well with one of her friends in September, and it doesn't look like they're going to be able to go. And she was talking about how sad she was, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's nothing like it. But the texture is just so different than anything I had before. It's so delicious. It's both creamy, but also has a little bit of texture to it. Okay, more broth. And you can add anything you want. You can't see me spilling a little bit, can you? You can add any ingredients you want to this. We're doing mushroom, asparagus, and peas with a little bit of lemon zest for springtime. But depending on the time of the year, if you are going to add something that has high water content, like the mushrooms or like a green, you want to cook that ahead of time to release some of that moisture, because you definitely don't want to add extra moisture at the end, or it'll just make it a little bit sticky or a little bit watery, and we don't want that. I forgot to mention as well that I always save a tablespoon of butter to add in at the very end. Just stir in a little bit of butter at the end. It'll give it the perfect creaminess. Some people add a little bit of cream at the end of their risotto, but that little bit of butter is how I learned how to make it in Italy, and that's what I go with. You know, everyone makes it a little bit different, but I can't recall any difference in learning how to make both risotto and also pasta carbonara, which I think I'm going to share with you guys as well. I learned the same way in Italy as I did in culinary school. Okay, we're about ready for a little bit more broth. So we'll do carbonara soon as well. I'm going to share with you guys later on today what we're going to cook. It's fine. I always spill something. I'm going to share with you guys later today what we're going to cook next month in our little Cook with Kris. I get on with you guys for almost an hour most Thursdays, and I love every minute of it. All right. So I'm going to show you guys, it is starting to get creamier, and you can see the rice really starting to cook. I have one tiny piece of mushrooms in there, so if you're like, well, what is that? That's what's happening. Okay, so this is what it looks like right now. I don't want to, it's pretty creamy, but you can still see that when I move it around, the liquid is still soaking into the rice. Like I said, each addition, it's going to take a little bit longer to soak in. And I'm going to taste it in just a second to kind of see where we're at. The best way to determine where you're at with your risotto is to taste it and to see how firm the rice still is. When you are starting to get to kind of just before al dente, where you're like, yeah, this isn't good enough to serve, that's when you want to add the asparagus, kind of at that last addition. The asparagus and the peas, because that will just cook them. We still need time. I'm gonna keep adding the broth and keep letting it cook. So good. It really is an experience to cook risotto. Just hanging out in your kitchen, which I know for many of you busy mamas out there, you've probably already shut this off because you're like, I'm not standing and stirring a pot for a half an hour. Please do it on the weekend. If you drink wine, have it with a glass of wine. If you drink kombucha, have it or do it with a glass of kombucha. Take this time. It's a beautiful experience, and it is so worth it when you taste it at the end. So we're just going to keep on stirring it. So I'm going to, in just a little bit, add a little bit of lemon zest to it as well. This is an optional ingredient. You don't need to add lemon zest. Pretty much anything I share with you guys, unless I tell you something is essential, is optional. You can always substitute it with something else. If you ever have a question about substituting something, you can always ask me. I won't always have an answer, but I can always give you a suggestion. But the lemon zest is best kind of close to the end. If you add it in too early, it gets a little bit bitter. So we don't want it to be too bitter. Stirring, looks like it could use a little bit more broth. So for those of you who don't know the rice/pasta trick to know if it's done, other than throwing it against the wall, don't throw your risotto against the wall. I've never heard of anyone throwing risotto against the wall, so I'm not suggesting that. But you know, people will tell you to throw spaghetti against the wall, and if it sticks, if it's starchy enough, it'll stick no matter what. So that's not a very good indicator. But if you cut it in half, if you take the piece and you cut it in half, and it still has white on the inside, then it's not cooked. You'll also be able to see that with the risotto. If it's not fully kind of cream colored, if it's still mostly white, it's definitely not cooked yet. But you can also taste it like I did as well. So how are we all doing this week? Can you guys believe, any of you who celebrate Easter, that Easter is next Sunday? I was just talking to my mom about Easter, and you know, we're just having our tiny little family Easter, like, you know, us and the kids and my parents and my sister. So, you know, just our tiny little family, keeping it safe still, but you know, of course, we're still planning. We're planning my honey mustard glazed ham and some roasted carrots. I think, yeah, we're gonna do roasted carrots, and I think green beans almondine. My sister's making a tiramisu. We're big Italian food fans around here. Can you tell? We're not even the tiniest bit Italian. Not at all. But we both spent time in Italy, and we love Italian food. Okay, and she's the dessert baker in our family. You will probably never see me on a Cook with Kris doing a dessert, other than when my daughter and I made dirt for, it's avocado chocolate pudding for Halloween. We made dirt together, and that's about as far as you'll see me in front of a camera making a dessert, because I'm not the dessert person. I like to eat them, but I'm definitely the cook. She's the baker, I'm the cook. It's a really great combination. Especially around the holidays, because it's like, dessert is yours, I will cover the cooking. If you guys have something delicious you're cooking up for Easter, let me know. I'm always here for more inspiration. All right, we're gonna taste this again in a minute, because it just keeps getting back to that point. But like I mentioned, it keeps getting back to that point I showed you before, where there's definitely still liquid. Okay, whoops, let's not lose the camera. There's definitely still some liquid in there, but it's taking a little bit longer to soak in. Sorry, guys. I think I need to learn that, to stop moving the camera. If anyone would like to volunteer as my free camera person, you're welcome. It's about time. Once it takes a little bit, like even longer for that liquid to soak in, it's about the time to try it again. But don't be disappointed if you're like, it's still not cooked. Just takes time. Just stir. Risotto requires patience. And this pan is a bit hot on one side. This Dutch oven has been with me for a very long time. It's my traveling Dutch oven. We're getting there. Turning it down a little bit more because we still need a little bit more time. So let's talk about reheating risotto. If you do make it earlier and you reheat it, you will likely want to let it be a little bit al dente, just a little bit. When you reheat it, you want to reheat it in a pot just like this with a little bit more liquid, and basically just bring it back to this point. Bring it back to the point where it's creamy. It will have absorbed whatever liquid was left in it, because you know you want your risotto to be that consistency that's a little bit creamy. It will have absorbed the liquid. It might look a little bit sticky if you leave it for a little while, but if you add it back to the pan, you just add a little bit of liquid to it and stir it until it's the consistency you want again, it'll come back to life. So you can definitely make it ahead of time, but don't cook it all the way because it'll turn mushy, because it will absorb the rest of the liquid. Just cook it to a little bit more al dente. reheat it with just a little bit of liquid, hot liquid, and just stir it in like that. My liquid is also cooling down a little bit over here since I don't have 2 burners, which is also why this might be taking a little bit longer than yours might. We started a little bit after 2 my time. I'm Eastern, so according to most risotto standards, this isn't taking very long at all. But I'm definitely gonna add a little bit more liquid, and I'm almost ready to add my asparagus and my peas. And like I said, these are going to cook in like the last couple of additions of liquid. So you wanna make sure there's enough liquid to cook those as well. They don't release a ton of water, so I'm not really worried. But if they do release some water, you can always just let it cook for a little bit longer so they evaporate. All right, we're gonna let that cook for another minute. I'm gonna heat up a little bit more broth just in case we need it. Like I said, I started with about 3 cups. It also, you know, it depends on the type of pan you use. If more liquid, like I said, if it's too hot, or if your pan is wider and the liquid is evaporating faster, which mine is not at this point, but it might take a little bit longer. Or sorry, it might take a little bit more liquid is what I meant to say. And it might take a little bit longer as well, so. All right, I'm gonna let that sit for a second. I'm gonna heat up a little bit more liquid just in case, but I think we're gonna be good. I'm gonna heat up a little bit more, and I am just using a chicken broth, just a Trader Joe's chicken stock. But if you want to keep this totally plant-based, like I mentioned before, you can just leave out the butter or use the replacement of your choice, and just use a veggie broth. My sister is allergic to tomatoes, so we don't use veggie broth around here unless I make it myself. Most veggie broths have tomatoes in them. And most Thursdays I also feed my parents because they let me use their nice kitchen. Otherwise you guys would be in my very dark kitchen at home, which is not so fun. All right, this looks pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and, because I can see it, it is bubbly. It is looking pretty soft. I'm gonna add in that asparagus. I probably need 1 more ladle of liquid. That's why I'm heating up just a little bit more. Add in my asparagus, and this is just cut on a diagonal, about 1-inch pieces. And I shared at the beginning, if you guys are hopping on a little bit later, I shared at the beginning how to snap the ends of the asparagus off so you only get the tender parts, especially in early spring. When it's not as tender, we don't want chewy asparagus. That's a no. So adding in that asparagus, once that's all stirred in, I'm gonna add in my spring peas. It's gonna get really thick now. I can hear my liquid is hot over there. I'm gonna add another ladleful. Stir that in to cook those vegetables and to finish cooking that rice. We will also season this in just a minute, but there's a reason we're tasting throughout. We don't want to over season it. We are going to be adding some Parmesan cheese to this as well. So I am going to add the lemon zest. I need to sneeze my fingers. This is the zest of about half of a lemon. I mentioned earlier, we don't want to put it in too early. We don't want it to get bitter. We want it to have a really fresh flavor to it. Adding some fresh basil right at the end or some fresh chopped chives at the end is also a really beautiful addition to this dish. if you have them. I do not today. We're gonna let that cook for just a minute, and I'm going to just grate my Parmesan. While this continues to cook, I will add, let me taste it. We're gonna taste before you add anything else, always. It's so close. But I want a little bit more. I know I'm not serving it to you guys, but I want you to see my whole process. So if you were here, I would serve you the perfect, most delicious risotto you have ever tasted. Spring risotto. And then I would serve you, you know, a seasonal one each season. But spring just feels like risotto season, doesn't it? I don't know. Next week, I'm going to share with you guys my favorite. We're going to totally like move continents. And next week, I'm going to share with you my Asian style turkey lettuce cups, or Asian inspired turkey lettuce cups, because we're just using kind of Asian inspired flavors. I know it's a very large continent with lots of countries, but Asian inspired lettuce wraps. They're really delicious, and those are definitely a weeknight dinner. Okay. This is, let me show you carefully what starts to happen. Okay, can you see how it's very, very creamy once the rice is basically cooked? It's super creamy. It's not absorbing a lot of that liquid anymore. And I've only shifted that temperature up and down just ever so slightly. When it seems like the liquid is evaporating a little bit faster than I want it to, that's when I just turn it down a tiny, like one notch, literally one notch. I've stayed at about medium the whole time, okay, or medium high. So we're gonna leave that for 1 second. I'm gonna grate the Parmesan. We're gonna add the Parmesan before we season it because my broth is pre-seasoned. We don't want to over salt it. Again, we want, and I say again, like anytime I ever share with you guys, I remind you that we want our food well seasoned, not salty. If your food is salty, you've gone too far. You can always take salt away, or sorry, you can always add salt, you can't take it away is what I meant to say. So there are, when I talked about salt a couple months ago now, there are salty foods that we can add to add that salt that we need to our dishes without adding actual salt. So one of those is Parmesan cheese. Another example would be something like olives or anchovies, like when I made my Caesar. Caesar dressing is all about layering the salt. I have that recipe on my blog now. I finally put that up on my blog for you guys. So I'm just using my microplane over here. I know you can't see, but would a day go by that I don't A, make a mess, or B, use my microplane? No, never. It is my favorite kitchen tool by far. So good. And my mom finally bought one, you guys. Finally. I've only been telling her for years. I know I should have just bought her one, but she wasn't going to use it until she bought it for herself. So there was a method behind my madness. I wasn't just being mean. Now she's going to use it. Okay. Adding that Parmesan, stirring it around. That was about the maximum amount of time that I would leave that sitting by itself because it is sticking ever so slightly on the side over here. There's one side of this pan that is, I need to replace it. I need to get myself a nice Le Creuset this size because I don't have one this size. So once the asparagus and the peas are bright green and your rice is cooked, I just added about a quarter to a third of a cup of Parmesan. We're gonna taste it. We're gonna make sure the rice is as perfect as I think it is. Perfect, okay. It has a little tiny bit of a bite, but you don't ever bite into it and you're like, that rice is not cooked. It's cooked, it's fully cooked. Tiny little bite to it. Barely needs any seasoning because I added that Parmesan, just a little bit of salt. And we're also gonna add those mushrooms. We're gonna save the rest of this broth. I've got, we got a half cup of broth left for when I reheat this later. We're gonna stir those mushrooms in right at the end. The lemon is very, very subtle. It's only about half of a lemon. It's a pretty small lemon. Really subtle. You can always add more if you want a little bit more of that freshness to it. And the only other thing, other than adding these mushrooms, that I'm going to do, and you can see there's like a tiny bit of liquid in the bottom there. There's not very much liquid left in those mushrooms. That's intentional because we don't want to add too much liquid to this risotto. I'm gonna turn it off. We're gonna try a piece of the asparagus. Here's my spoon. You still want the asparagus to have bite to it, just like the risotto. I need to take this off the heat because it is quite hot and it's going to continue to cook if I don't. I'm just going to take it off the heat over here and I will put it in a little bowl to share with you guys. And like I said, right at the very end, I like to add just a tablespoon of butter, stirred in. So we're gonna go ahead. Where did my knife go? Here's my butter knife. And we're just gonna stir in about a tablespoon. No measurements. About. Okay, I'm gonna bring this on over so you can see it. I wish my hot plate weren't so high. This is a way better view. Okay. Oh my gosh, so good, you guys. Not sticky. A little bit creamy. Piled high with veggies because, you know, healthy balance mama over here. We gotta bring in those veggies. But you can make this without any veggies at all if you want to as well, or just serve veggies on the side. Oh my gosh, you guys, so good. I want to eat this right now. But I can't. I have a podcast call in a few minutes, which I'm very excited about. So I'm gonna grab a plate or a bowl and I'm gonna share this with you guys. No, I'm gonna get one of these so you can see. This will be easier to see the texture. Okay. You don't want your risotto so thick that it is sticking to your spoon, but you don't want it so watery that you don't want it watery. We're gonna go with that. We're gonna add a little bit of parmesan on top. Use that microplane again. Oh my gosh, you guys. Okay, do you see that? Okay, this is not the best view, but you guys, it is so good. All right, new spoon, fresh spoon. Let's take a bite together. And as always, I will put this. So good. I will put the recipe in my stories. So you can go ahead and check that out. I'm not saving these recipes. They're only in stories for 24 hours after you watch this. There will be an opportunity in the future to be able to cook right alongside me to get the ingredients ahead of time to save these recipes. But for any of you guys who are on watching kind of real time, you can grab the recipes over in my stories after this. So like I mentioned, next week I'm going to be cooking up my Asian inspired turkey lettuce cups. You could also use chicken. They're really simple, really delicious, really flavorful, great for spring with the crispy lettuce and the warm turkey mixture, really easy to whip up. The kids go crazy over them. I feel like I should probably make a double batch because they love them so much, but they're a great family-friendly dish and they're much quicker than risotto. This took about 40 minutes to cook up, but that's okay because it's worth it. It is so delicious. I hope you guys will go ahead and make this for yourselves. Let me know if you do. Tag me in your pictures if you make this or any of the recipes that I cook alongside you guys here. I appreciate all of you guys being on, taking the time, whether you're watching it live or you're watching this later on. I hope you guys all have a beautiful Thursday, and I will share with you guys soon what we're going to be cooking up next month because I can't believe it's almost April. Have a great Thursday and a great weekend, and I'll catch you guys next week. Same place, same time, 2 o'clock Eastern to cook again.